It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The violence must stop. The plea from the United Nations as the Palestinian city of Jenin burns. Hamas claims responsibility for a car ramming attack in Tel Aviv. Tonight, Israeli forces began to withdraw from the occupied West Bank.
People we've spoken to here say they will continue to defend the city. I mean, you can see it in evidence there. And the Israelis say they will come back here if they need to.
Also tonight, a man is found guilty of murdering a mother and her two daughters by setting their flat alight, then ignoring their screams. Former Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage denies reports he has too little funds after his private bank closed his account. Plus, the ferocious fires caused by faulty e-bike batteries, with investigators calling for more regulation. We hear from the mayor trapped for 5 days with no food or water after taking this shortcut home. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. Israeli forces began withdrawing from the Palestinian city of Jenin this evening after the biggest military operation for 2 decades. Today, the United Nations pleaded for the violence to end and revealed that 3 children were among the 11 people killed during 2 days of raids and airstrikes. But then another attack was captured on CCTV. A young man, claimed as a Hamas militant, drove his car towards a restaurant in Tel Aviv, then carried out a stabbing attack, injuring 9 people. Well, the week began with drone bombings, then a ground incursion into the densely populated refugee camp in the northern West Bank. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle travelled to Jenin. A warning, his report shows the moment of a retaliatory attack in Israel and the immediate aftermath.
The drive into Jenin is an obstacle course around barricades in the road and burning tyres. The Israeli military has set up checkpoints on the outskirts, stopping everyone as they go in and out. Inside, there are very few people on the streets. All the shops have closed and families are sheltering in their homes. The only people were young men who say they'll keep fighting the Israelis until they leave.
It's not normal. 48 hours and the boys are still in the camp facing airstrikes. People are fleeing their homes. They are destroying the camp. We don't know where the murders are, and people are still under the rubble. And the jets are firing.
You can hear the drones overhead, yeah.
The constant sound of Israeli drones overhead is only broken by ambulance sirens as they rush to reach the wounded. Columns of heavily armoured Israeli military vehicles patrol the centre of Jenin. There are more than 1,000 soldiers involved in this operation. Video released by the Israeli military shows weapons and explosives they've seized. They say they found an underground stockpile dug beneath a mosque.
The people we've spoken to here say they will continue to defend the city. I mean, you can see it in evidence there. And the Israelis say they will come back here if they need to.
In the middle of the night, thousands of Palestinians fled the refugee camp in the city for safety elsewhere, many with their hands in the air, some waving white flags. The United Nations says it urgently needs to get food, water and medicine into the city, and the Red Cross said the situation is getting worse with each passing minute. On Tuesday afternoon in Tel Aviv, a car drove into people, injuring 10. Israel said it was a terror attack. This CCTV shows the attacker stabbing people on the street. He was shot dead. Hamas have claimed responsibility and said it was in retaliation for Jenin. Back in Jenin, the fighting continued through the afternoon. But on Tuesday evening, Israeli forces started to withdraw from the city. The operation, which was the biggest in the West Bank for almost 20 years, appears to be over, at least for now.
Alistair is back in Jerusalem for us this evening. So, Alistair, there's indications that Israeli troops are withdrawing, but not without cost there.
No, this was an operation that was
expected to last for many, many days when it was originally carried out, but about 48 hours, almost exactly since that first drone strike in Jenin, the Israeli military is now leaving the city. We understand that in their efforts to try and extract themselves from the city, they have had to carry out more airstrikes, but from what we understand, they are very much leaving the city and the operation is over. They feel that they have achieved the objectives they wanted to achieve, and for now, at least, as I said in my report, that operation is over. The problem is they leave a city where we were today, where, you know, this has been going on for many, many years. This is not the first time by any stretch that the Israeli military has been in Jenin. They go in there very regularly, and every time it incentivizes many of those in the city to fight back against Israel. And so it is very, very hard to see how this operation, although it might bring some sort of short-term temporary peace to what is happening here in Israel and the West Bank, one of the bloodiest years of the year here. In the long term, I don't think that will achieve its objectives. And the Israeli military, whilst they would have captured weapons, they would have gathered a lot of intelligence, they would have arrested many people in the course of the last 48 hours. You know, the problem, the issue, the resentment, the anger between the two sides, nothing has changed there.
Alistair, in Jerusalem, thank you. He set their home alight, then he ignored their screams. Today, a 31-year-old man was found guilty of murdering a mother and her 2 young daughters by pouring petrol through their letterbox while they slept. Fatoumatta Hydara's husband remembered his wife as an incredible mother and his daughters Fatimah and Naeemah as 2 angels who deserved a beautiful childhood and a full life. Becky Johnson has this report.
1-year-old Naeemah and her 3-year-old sister Fatimah were murdered as they slept. They were at home with their mother, Fatoumatta Hydara, when their next-door neighbour set fire to their flat in Nottingham. It was the early hours of the morning. Firefighters tried to rescue the family inside, but the girls couldn't be saved. Their mother died days later in hospital. As Jamie Barrow was convicted of their murders, their father and husband spoke about the loss of his children and his wife.
If love and compassion could make a person immortal, she would have lived forever. She was most incredible mother to Fatimah and Naeemah, 2 angels who deserve a very beautiful childhood and a full life.
At this point in time, I'm going to place you under arrest for murder ×2, OK?
Barrow was arrested after telling officers he was going to hand himself in. He admitted pouring petrol through the family's letterbox and setting it alight, but tried to claim that he didn't know they were in.
He denied the killings were deliberate. Thankfully, the investigation team was able to provide overwhelming evidence that this tragic event was indeed murder. We saw through his lies, and thankfully, so did the jury.
Barrow had been drinking on the night of the fire. He bought more beer, then headed home. Moments after the fire took hold, he calmly walked away, returning a short time later to ask police how bad it was, even smiling at officers as he answered their questions. He later rang police to ask when he could get back into his flat.
Hello, my name's Jamie. I live on Fairhill Close at number 19, next to where the fire was earlier this morning.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any update on whether I'm allowed back into my property or not.
Prosecutors say his motive for the murders may never be known. He has a personality disorder and says he's lit fires before to release stress, claiming it mesmerises him. But another theory is that he was annoyed about rubbish bags that had been left in an alley. Fatimah Drammeh was in America at the time of the fire. His wife and daughters were applying for visas to join him. Their dream of a new life together shattered by a neighbour who still refuses to explain why he murdered them. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Nottingham.
Yesterday, it was the supermarkets who stood accused of profiteering during a cost of living crisis. This morning, a similar charge was levelled at the 4 big high street banks for failing to pass on rising interest rates to savers. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso can explain more.
The big banks have been summoned because regulators are concerned they're short-changing savers, and we can see the problem here. The purple line is the Bank of England base rate, up from almost 0 to 5% in 18 months. That's seen mortgage rates, the orange line, bolt up too. This is the 2-year fixed rate, almost 6.5% now. 5-year fixes have just gone over 6% as well. But savings down here in green have dawdled by comparison. An average rate of just above 2.4% for instant access accounts. So this gap is an opportunity for banks to profit from savers and borrowers. Landlord David France is both.
With interest rates going up, we're getting hurt with the money that we borrow. And the money that's in the bank, we're not getting enough interest, and certainly not the appropriate interest which we feel we should be getting based on the rates going up on our debt.
For now, rate rises are benefiting savers more than they're costing mortgage holders. The orange line here is the increase in savings income in the last 18 months. That's nudging 25 billion extra in accounts. But the extra cost of mortgages is about half that, around £13 billion. And that's because increased savings rates are felt instantly, while your mortgage payment depends on your deal. And almost 9 out of 10 mortgages are now fixed rates. Almost 60% of homeowners have 5-year fixes. That's the red here. A quarter, the blue, have up to 2 years left, which leaves just 12% the portion in green on floating rates, which are exposed immediately to rate rises. And that's a huge change from 7 years ago, when almost half of us had mortgage rates that were variable. And this matters because it's now taking longer for interest rates to squeeze the economy and thus bring down inflation. The Prime Minister agrees that's a problem.
You're right about the transmission mechanism being perhaps slower when it comes to mortgages than it has been in the past because of the preponderance of people to have at least short-term fixed-rate mortgages now, but that's something that the bank take into account in their modelling.
All of this will change in the next 18 months. Around 1.7 million fixed-rate deals will expire next year, leaving households paying an extra £2,900 on average. That's a wave of financial pain that increased saving is unlikely to offset.
Paul Kelso there. Now from the high street to a more boutique financial institution. The private bank Coutts is locked in a public row with the former Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage over a decision to close his account. This evening, Mr Farage denied reports that he had too little funds and insisted he was being targeted because of his political views. Here's Murray Aurora.
A man known for his divisive political views, Nigel Farage is back in the headlines. But this time, it's his finances that have got people talking. The former UKIP leader has claimed the exclusive bank Coutts has closed his account due to his political status as a politically exposed person.
That is now 9 other banks that have refused me. They're telling the press I don't meet their wealth threshold. Well, they've never mentioned that before in the previous 10 years. The worst of the story is they denied to me on the phone on Friday that I was a PEP, a politically exposed person. That's the reason nobody else will have me, and Coutts are, frankly, being very, very dishonest.
Sky News contacted Coutts for comment, and they directed us to their website, which reads, clients are required to maintain at least £1 million in investments or borrowing, mortgage, or £3 million in savings. Coutts also explains it takes into account commercial viability, legal or regulatory requirements, and reputation.
I'm doing my best, mate.
Claiming the bank's actions are politically motivated, Farage has failed to deny that he has too few funds in his account to remain eligible. At a time when banks and the financial sector are already in the firing line over allegations of profiteering regarding interest rates, questions around whether banks are targeting their clients because of their political views will do nothing to enamour the sector to the public. Rishi Sunak and Nigel Farage have not been the most obvious political bedfellows, but today the Prime Minister weighed into the debate.
The Chancellor's been very clear about this and spoken to the regulators. Obviously, we have to respect people's right to free speech, and that should not be an excuse to close anyone's account, and that's not what we would expect.
He's known for his often controversial views, but he claims he's now being targeted for them. Mari Aurora, Sky News.
Tomorrow, the NHS marks its 75th anniversary with a special service at Westminster Abbey. But the data shows that with record waiting lists and staff shortages, there is little for patients to celebrate. Exclusive analysis for Sky News shows health inequalities are getting wider, while patients face a postcode lottery to access care. Well, all but 2 of the 50 most deprived neighbourhoods in England are in the north. And of those, just over half are in the northwest, concentrated in cities like Manchester and Liverpool, where some of the starkest differences in health outcomes can be seen. The Wirral has the biggest proportion of preventable deaths under 75 than any other local authority in England. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports now from Birkenhead, which has one of the lowest life expectancies in the country.
I've only got an urgent call left for this morning, so I can get the GP to give you a call back. Can I just have a brief reason for the calls?
It's just after 8 in the morning and the scramble for a doctor's appointment is well underway.
We've had our phones open for about an hour. We've already got almost 40 calls booked already.
Dr. Lakshman Aryaraj is triaging his patients.
Hello? Hi, Joe. How can I help you today?
He spots one he's worried about and wants her to come in immediately.
What we'll try and do is to squeeze you in and get a blood test done while you're here.
Yes, that's fine.
Dr. Aryaraj's clinic is in Birkenhead in the Wirral, one of the most deprived communities in the country. Here, the M53 is a dividing line. If you live on the right of the motorway heading north, you can expect to die younger than if you live on the left. The Wirral is one of the most divided areas in the country, both in terms of economic deprivation and, of course, health outcomes. And it's here we find the biggest gap in preventable deaths for any local authority in England. Women here have the 6th lowest life expectancy at just over 74 years. And for men, it's worse, the 3rd lowest life expectancy at around 67.
I think the biggest problem is money, really. I think there needs to be more employment from the point of view of getting people into work.
The more can be done with housing. We see housing that's boarded up, which if a bit of money was spent, we could do it up for people who are homeless or need accommodation.
You've had a temperature for a few days and you've been feeling tired for a few weeks now.
Health inequalities are greater here in the northwest than anywhere else in England.
You can probably throw a cricket ball from significant wealth to abject poverty in this area. We need more resources in our health system. And I would sort of put a plea for if and when those resources come that we prioritise areas such as these, where I think that extra resource can make the most difference.
The NHS says lessons have been learned from the pandemic about connecting with communities.
We noticed that many people from some of our socio-economically deprived communities or people from some of our ethnic minority communities seemed to struggle with confidence to come forward to engage with public services.
You're here to see Susan Lockwood. She's got some pain in her back.
Dr. Aryaraj's patients' needs are changing. There are more care home visits, reflecting an ageing population with complex health issues.
Hello. Mandy was telling me that you've had a bit of a pain lately.
It's arthritis. It's just getting worse and worse, and to be honest, it is starting to spread.
Try a bit of the soup.
This, with widening health inequalities, will test the NHS as it faces up to its next 75 years. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in the Wirral.
The Metropolitan Police has reopened an investigation into potential COVID breaches during a party at Conservative Party headquarters in December 2020. Tier 2 restrictions were in place at the time, meaning no social mixing outside households or support bubbles. A Tory birthday gathering in Parliament the same month for the Wife of Privileges Committee member Sir Bernard Jenkins is also being reinvestigated. It's reported that he attended the event, which was cited by Boris Johnson in a statement accusing Sir Bernard of monstrous hypocrisy. Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million after admitting to accidentally pumping undiluted sewage into rivers near Gatwick Airport in 2017. The firm admitted guilt in all of the 4 charges it faced. Thames Water has been sanctioned several times in recent years for missing targets and pollution incidents. Last week, Sky News reported the government was considering temporarily taking the company into public ownership because of its debt load. The Captain Tom Moore Foundation says it stopped taking donations or making payments as an investigation into its finances continues. The Charity Commission is looking into concerns about the charity's management by the family of the late veteran, who raised millions for the NHS. It comes as planning bosses ordered an unauthorised building at the Bedfordshire home of Captain Tom's daughter to be demolished. Southwark Crown Court in London has heard that Kevin Spacey had a panicked look on his face when a man rejected his groping advances at a pub in the Cotswolds. The alleged victim's account, recorded in a police interview, was played at the actor's trial. He's accused of sex offences against 4 men and denied all charges. Senior fire chiefs have warned e-bike and e-scooter owners not to charge them overnight after a mother and her 2 children died at their home in Cambridgeshire. Investigators believe cheaper, unregulated lithium batteries are causing intense blazes and putting families at risk, as Shingi Marurike reports.
This is the moment a lithium battery explodes, engulfing a kitchen in an inferno. Part of a growing number of fires linked to faulty batteries in electric bikes and scooters. Del Williams saw that danger firsthand. He bought a used e-scooter online. Watch how it burst into flames at his home.
It sounded like explosions just happened, and when I've gone towards opening my door, I've seen orange flames inside from the other side of the door. It's indescribable, man. It's like when you've been put in that situation, it's like, I'm lucky to be alive.
Not everyone escapes these incidents unscathed. A flat fire this weekend in Cambridge is believed to have been sparked by an e-bike left on charge, killing Gemma Germany along with her children Lily and Oliver. As battery-powered bikes and scooters become more popular, fire chiefs are warning the public to take extra care.
We are seeing an increase in these types of fires, and we kind of connect that with the fact that people own more of these types of light electric vehicles. People really need to be aware about this type of incident, given the fact that they can be so ferocious, and we've seen the devastation that this can cause and the tragedy that comes along with it.
This electric bike manufacturer says because e-bikes are costly with no government subsidies available, people often revert to cheaper models and batteries.
I charge my bike in the house, so I want to make sure that they're safe, let alone anybody else I sell the bike to.
This battery has been tested and certified. One issue is there's an influx in cheap batteries being bought online, some from places where regulations aren't as strict. When batteries overheat, consequences can be catastrophic, which is why some experts are calling for tighter import controls.
When a lithium-ion battery is abused, for example, by being overcharged, overheated, crushed, or due to defects or contamination introduced at the manufacturing stage, they generate huge amounts of gas and huge amounts of heat.
With dangers now being linked to increasingly popular modes of transport, it's clear more safety measures and scrutiny are needed to avoid potentially deadly circumstances. Shingi Marike, Sky News, Leeds.
Now, when former Mayor Chris Cummins decided to take a shortcut on his walk to an East London train station, he didn't expect it would lead to a fight for survival. In fact, he was trapped for 5 days without food and water as February temperatures dipped below zero. Well, today, both he and the man who found him have been speaking to Sky's Betty Cockrell.
75 years old and stuck, like this, for 5 brutally cold days in February. This tiny passageway is where Chris Cummins became trapped after trying to take a shortcut behind his local football club. Crawling underneath a pipe, he found himself wedged in. With no food or water and no phone, it's incredible that he survived.
I'm told that had I been there for another 2 days or more, I may well have died. And it was basically Ricky Eaton, who was the man who saved me.
This is Ricky.
He's gone through there and he's crawled through from what we can gather. I think he fell face first.
He's the chairman of Redbridge Football Club and was thankfully on site that day, despite cold temperatures stalling play.
He was obviously really thirsty and he was in a poor situation, to be fair. But he handled it really well, and the strength he's shown to make it and survive was really, really like, I can't even explain, yeah.
It was a moment the two men couldn't quite believe.
He said, "Oh, you're an angel." So like, that was quite an emotional moment for us and for him.
Chris was taken straight to hospital and has spent the past few months recovering. He lost a dramatic amount of weight and is still struggling to get his strength back. But he's incredibly grateful to the man who found him.
Thank you so much, Ricky, for what you've done. You saved my life. And it's a privilege knowing you, and I owe my life to you.
As for future journeys home, would you be taking any more shortcuts anytime soon?
No. Well, not that way anyway.
Becky Cottrell, Sky News, East London.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this on the front of the Daily Mail. Their headline, Boris's Partygate accuser faces his own police probe. Well, tonight we'll be joined by the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the deputy editor at Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Israeli troops have begun withdrawing from Jenin in the West Bank tonight, winding down 2 days of raids, which have killed at least 12 Palestinians. In retaliation, Hamas has claimed responsibility for a ramming attack in Tel Aviv, which injured 8 people. 31-year-old Jamie Barrow has been found guilty of the murders of a mother and her 2 young daughters, whose flat he set on fire in Nottingham last November. And the Prime Minister says banks should not be allowed to close customers' accounts because of their views, after Nigel Farage accused Coutts Private Bank of shutting down his account over his politics. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the chief leader writer of The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. And welcome to both of you. So front pages then, let us start with the Daily Mail. Boris's Partygate accuser faces his own police probe, reads the front of the Mail, amid reports that a formal probe has been launched into a birthday drinks bash held for Sir Bernard Jenkins' wife. The Metro has interviewed the first baby born out of the NHS, who says we must cherish the health service as it celebrates its 75th anniversary tomorrow. Cheaper food on the way as a price war finally hots up, reads the front of the Daily Express as it looks at supermarket inflation. The front of The Guardian looks at the government's plans for global warming, with the headline, UK ready to drop an £11.6 billion pledge for a climate fund. The US pushes for von der Leyen to be the next NATO chief, reads the headline in the Daily Telegraph, as they report that Ben Wallace's candidacy has been blocked. The Financial Times leading with the Bank of England, looking at contentious plans to force more international banks to set up subsidiaries in the UK. And the front page of the Daily Mirror has what they say is an exclusive interview with the broadcaster Fiona Phillips, speaking about her own Alzheimer's diagnosis. And The Star looks at the influence of popular television shows on politics. Well, a quick reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them and head to Sonia Sodha and Henry Hill. Henry, why don't you kick off for us then? Daily Mail front page, a couple of Partygate probes by the police. They've picked up on one for Sir Bernard Jenkins, who we saw in action today, of course. What do you make of their response to this news?
So this is catnip to Boris Johnson's supporters. Bernard Jenkins was one of the senior Conservatives on the Privileges Committee that delivered that damning report into Boris Johnson over Partygate and eventually precipitated his departure from the House of Commons. And now the police are investigating an allegedly lockdown-breaking party held by Sir Bernard to celebrate his wife's birthday. Now, obviously, we don't want to prejudge this investigation. We don't know what's going to happen. But Sir Bernard's reappearance at the Privileges Committee has been his first public outing in a little while. He's been accused of going to ground for several weeks and sort of keeping a low media profile. So it definitely, obviously, is going to be very uncomfortable for him personally, but it is also unhelpfully going to give succour to Boris Johnson's most committed supporters, who are just on a warpath and out to damage as many people as they can.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it, that Boris Johnson's team still feel the need to do that, even though he has exited stage left. The other one, of course, is the mingle-jingle, Conservative HQ party. Who does that implicate? The former candidate for London Mayor who's about to be a peer. I mean, there's all sorts of questions that continue, Sonia.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 2 events that the Met Police have reopened investigations into. One is this party it's alleged to have taken place in Parliament that Bernard Jenkins was allegedly at. But the second is, of course, and this is what The Guardian focuses on, a party in Conservative Party headquarters. We already had some photographs from this party, but in the last few weeks, an actual video has emerged. It's proved extremely controversial because the former Tory mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey, was at that party, and he was awarded a peerage in Boris Johnson's recent resignation honours. There's also someone there who was awarded an OBE, and Sean Bailey's former campaign chief, is now running the campaign of another Tory hopeful to be London mayor. So these are people still very much involved in Conservative politics, and the Met Police have said that they're reopening the investigation into this event as well, that the video provides further evidence. The Met Police have apparently got some criteria that they apply to events retrospectively from during the pandemic. It's, you know, there's got to be sort of significant evidence of wrongdoing, flaunting of the rules, and they say this video provides that evidence that they need. What's also interesting is that they've also said that they aren't yet reopening, or opening, I should say, an investigation into alleged wrongdoing at Chequers by Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson. They say they don't have enough evidence to open an investigation into that.
Yes, all 16 of them, as The Guardian points out. It also makes the front page there too, involving, as you said, Boris Johnson, his wife Carrie, and close friends at Downing Street and Chequers between June 2020 and May 2021. And Henry, while we're on Boris Johnson, and in fact the peerages question, that was something that was put to Rishi Sunak at the liaison committee of select committee heads today. He was asked specifically about his involvement in that list, Boris Johnson's list, and whether there are questions about it. Rishi Sunak making quite clear that he passes the list on without any intervention by him. But do you think we'll get more on that list to come out? Because it was all lost on the day that Boris Johnson, you know, decided to quit his seat, wasn't it? You know, do you think we'll see further investigations into those people?
Potentially, you know, it depends on obviously the evidence that emerges. It was one of the reasons that Boris Johnson's list was so surprising is that there were already these question marks over people like Sean Bailey, over lockdown rules, and so they've gone forward. Now it remains to be seen whether or not new allegations emerge against anyone, or whether any of the allegations that have already been aired end up getting taken forward by the police. But really, I think the extraordinary thing for Rishi Sunak is actually that he didn't intervene on Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. You know, as someone who supports the House of Lords and think it's a valuable institution, and indeed supports the honour system, I think that this was one last example of Boris Johnson being extraordinarily reckless with the reputation of British institutions. I think it would have been perfectly reasonable for the Prime Minister to hold off on passing on that list. It is only a convention that he passes it on. Boris Johnson was obviously not Prime Minister. He can't do anything himself. It is all being governed by convention, and conventions can evolve. And instead, he's ended up in this really politically self-inflicted, damaging situation where a couple of days before the Partygate report came in and Boris Johnson finally blew up, Rishi Sunak signed off most of his resignation honours list. It was a mistake.
Well, I mean, Rishi Sunak said he was just following protocol. And that is what you have to do. Just very quickly, Henry, while we've got you, you know, you've got the finger on the pulse, if you like, of the Tory membership. How do they feel now about Boris Johnson, and how do they feel Rishi Sunak is doing? Because it's, you know, you saw today on his face on the liaison committee, it's not an easy job at times, and certainly not at the moment.
I mean, it's definitely not an easy job. So Rishi Sunak, Rishi Sunak is not polling well with Conservative Party activists. In our monthly cabinet league table, which we published this morning, he had a negative score, but then so did 8 other people who either are members of the cabinet or have the right to attend cabinet, so he wasn't alone. It's not all entirely down to Rishi. I think he's kind of the recipient as well of just bone-deep frustration by Conservative activists that has built up over the Johnson premiership and the Truss premiership, I guess we can still call it that, about the lack of progress that's been made on various Conservative goals. But absolutely, you know, he is struggling. As for Boris Johnson, he still has his hardcore of committed supporters. But when we ran recent questions on Boris Johnson, support for him returning to Parliament as a Conservative candidate, it is still there, but it's going down. I think there's a recognition that his time has passed.
OK, well, more difficulties for the Prime Minister, more controversy too, if we look at the lead story for The Guardian, Sonia. The government, they say, is drawing up plans to drop the UK's flagship £11.6 billion climate and nature funding pledge, as the Prime Minister is accused of betraying populations vulnerable to global heating. So what is the pledge and how significant is this?
So this pledge it's a 5-year pledge, 5-year commitment that the UK has made to spend 11.6 billion between 2021 and 2026. It's a contribution to a global fund that is aimed at tackling climate change around the world, particularly amongst less affluent nations, and protecting nature and wildlife, for example, protecting forestry. Now, the UK's always been seen as a global leader on these sorts of commitments, but The Guardian is reporting this evening news of an internal memo between government departments where essentially this memo sets out the reasons for why this 11.6 billion is going to be difficult to meet. I think it's incredibly worrying and also massively self-defeating. We know that climate change is increasingly going to drive migration movements across the globe as more and more people aren't able to inhabit where they live anymore as a result of sort of catastrophic changes in the climate. And, you know, this fund is something that's aimed at helping to reduce the impacts of global heating worldwide, really, but particularly helping less affluent nations reduce their carbon emissions. So it's a really, really important initiative. And I think for the UK to renege would be very, very worrying indeed. And when you think about it, 11.6 billion over 5 years in the grand scale of government spending, it really isn't that much.
I mean, yes, the Guardian pointing out that the problem is that help for Ukraine falls within the aid budget, so it's almost impossible to meet these targets. And of course, it was a political, some might say, decision to cut the aid budget of the UK, Henry.
Yeah, the government cut it from 0.7 to 0.5% of GDP on account of they said the enormous pressure on the public finances. And, you know, ultimately that's a move that consistently, I think, polls well, at least with Conservative voters, but it does leave them with this problem. This is also an example of classic Treasury thinking, right? You know, you make this big commitment and then you say that actually you're going to spend most of the money in the next financial period, in the next 5-year spending round, right? You'll spend a little bit of money now, but you'll definitely spend the rest of the money later, and then things get tight and the money gets cut. This happens in British spending and across departments all the time. It's one of the biggest problems with the way that the British government handles money in general. It's one of the reasons that HS2 is so expensive, is because everything is shunted into the future in order to keep the 5-year spending within the Treasury's limits. So this is a deeply unfortunate development. It seems like it's been entirely predictable, given that we know the government has known what it's spending on Ukraine. It's known that it slashed the headline budget. You know, the FCDO will have known the financial implications of this. So they should have seen it coming, but this is not a problem that's unique to aid. It is not a problem that's unique to this. It is just a symptom of how badly the Treasury manages government budgets.
Well, staying with environmental issues with financial implications to the ULEZ story, inside pages of the Metro, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan lacks the legal power to expand the capital's ultra-low emission zone. This is the Tory-led councils surrounding London who've brought this case. Sonia.
So this is shaping up to be a big legal fight between Sadiq Khan on the one hand, who wants to expand the £12.50 a day charge for vehicles that don't meet the standards for the ultra-low emission zones. So cars, etc., would have to pay £12.50 a day, and he wants to extend that zone to the whole of Greater London, so it would cover every London borough. And there are a number of Conservative-run councils on the outskirts of London, places like Bromley, for example, that are challenging that decision and taking him to court as to whether he's got the legal power to do that. And I think it remains to be seen what the outcome of that court battle is, but the issues at stake are really, really important. So on the one hand, you've got the fact that, you know, we've got really terrible air pollution in London. We breach kind of legal limits. We know it's associated with illness and deaths, for example, in children with asthma. And, you know, it's really important that we take action, quite urgent action, to improve the quality of air in London, because it really does genuinely cost lives. On the other hand, it's very unpopular, a £12.50 charge for polluting vehicles. And what the Conservative councils are saying is that some people can't afford to either pay that charge or switch to a cleaner vehicle. My feeling is that it's a sort of necessary evil, really. We've got to find a way of bringing air pollution in London down. But this is really turning into a legal fight about what are the powers of the mayor. Does he have the powers to impose this?
Haven't got time for a full answer, but thumbs up or thumbs down for this policy, Henry?
I live in central London and use public transport all the time. So from my perspective, it's obviously fine. But if you live in one of the outer boroughs of London and your life much more resembles that of a town where you use your car all the time, I can see why this might be very challenging.
OK. Sonia, Henry, stay there. Lots more still to come, including this on the front of the Daily Express. Cheaper food on the way as a price war, the paper suggests, finally hots up.
After 30 meters, the pressure pushed me down. It's called a free fall, and this is for me the best part. It feels like you are flying.
First of all, when I saw people doing it, I'd never heard of freediving, didn't know what it looked like, and I was amazed by the visuals of people behaving more like seals and dolphins under the water, no scuba tanks, nothing like that, and I was hooked. And then when I learned about Stephen and Alessia, who were the people in the film, and their connection and what they were trying to do, I just thought this is an incredible, incredible story.
Well, freediving is basically holding your breath and popping your head on the water.
It's a bit more complicated than that.
Well, no, basically that's freediving, but then we do the competitive part, and that's going as deep as possible and pushing human limits, I guess. And the dangers, you can black out because you're holding your breath for an extended time. But we have safety divers with us to minimize the risk and to bring us up if we black out on the water.
So Alessia and Stephen...
They're featured in the movie, obviously.
Yeah, the film follows Alessia and Stephen from very early on. Like, we've footage that's 40 years old. So we watch them as kids, like, have a dream and follow their gut and follow those dreams. And for almost 20 years, when they come together then and meet at the pinnacle of the freediving world, and they start to work together and they start to break records, and they decide that they're going to do this major freediving challenge, which is to go down 50 metres and through the arch in Egypt. It's a 30-metre arch and out the other side. So that's kind of what the film is about. And their emotional connection to each other, to the sea, and really trying to push their limits, like the human limit, together. The film will be on Netflix on the 19th of July, and there will be a limited release in London on the 14th.
Hello there, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the deputy editor at Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome back to both of you. Lots of news about supermarkets this week. Daily Express suggests that supermarkets are waging a war to drive down prices on food. Sonia.
Yes, this is right. So apparently Sainsbury's has announced that it's reducing the prices of 100 of its sort of key products. And it says that it thinks that this is the start of hopefully falling price inflation, which I think news of which would come as a huge relief to people up and down the country who are really struggling with bills as a result of higher energy prices, higher mortgage rates and rents, and of course higher food prices. But this is just the sort of first sign that food prices might eventually start to fall. I think we're a long way from knowing that that's a dead cert. So I think we should be cautious before doing too much celebrating yet.
Let's move on, shall we, to the Metro. Once again, news about Thames Water. After Sky News broke the news last week about their financial difficulties after the exit of their chief executive, Henry, this time fined £3.3 million after a sewage spill killed more than 1,000 fish and turned rivers black. And the Metro is suggesting the company deliberately attempted to cover up the discharge of millions of litres of waste into waterways close to Gatwick Airport. Part of a court hearing. And this, of course, comes amid great angst amongst British people about the sewage discharges that we're seeing.
Yeah, just in case there were sort of 5 people left in the country who thought that Thames Water were doing a good job. Here we have handily a second story from the past to remind us that, in fact, they've been terrible for ages. It is remarkable. There's not much detail in the Metro about the allegations that they misled the Environment Agency and tried to cover it up. But when you read the rest of the story, you can see why they might, right? Apparently, when this overspill happened, there were no alarms in place to alert staff that there was an overspill and that all of this water was being discharged into the river network. When they finally did discover that there was a problem, they couldn't get in touch with the lead engineer because the lead engineer was awaiting delivery of a new mobile phone and no one had thought to give them one in the interim just in case they needed to do their job. It's just absolutely remarkable when you think about the fact that apparently this is what causes an awful lot of these issues. You know, sometimes there are, water companies can't be blamed for everything. This country is still running largely on Victorian water infrastructure and we don't build things like reservoirs and so on. But ultimately, so many of these leaks, which cause huge environmental damage and also prevent people from enjoying rivers, swimming at the beach and stuff like that, really important stuff, are down to basic failures of systems, the failure to have an alarm, the failure to make sure you can contact your staff in good time. It's not a surprise that they tried to mislead the Environment Agency, if that's what they did. But yeah, they've been caught and put in the dock.
I mean, it sounds horrifying, doesn't it? The litany of mistakes that were made there. The Metro pointing out the company has 20 previous fines for pollution. The judge in this case ordering bosses to put in every effort into tidying up the problem areas. But it feels like Britain's going backwards on this. Blue flag beaches, we celebrated each and every one over several decades, Sonia, and here we are, back to square one on this, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Henry is absolutely right that, we've got big issues with our infrastructure around water. But I think the way that the industry was privatised is very much part of that issue. So we've had these privatised, essentially, firms come in that run monopolies over water in their local area. They've had too few incentives to invest in upgrading that sort of Victorian infrastructure. And there's been a lot of private equity investment and private equity investors who've extracted out profits without making those investments. And now we've got Thames Water, a firm that's loaded up with debt, on the brink of collapse, while its private equity owners have extracted out value from the company at the expense of bill payers, which is just really, really wrong.
Sonia, I'm going to stay with you, if you don't mind, for the front of the Daily Mirror, which is shattering news to all her fans. Fiona Phillips revealing that she has Alzheimer's, which has utterly ravaged her family, being diagnosed a year ago at just the age of 61. So we certainly sent her, all our very best, don't we?
Absolutely. And I always think it's so brave when people speak out publicly about a diagnosis to sort of help share information about it. Fiona Phillips, she's a well-loved former GMTV presenter. She's a columnist for The Mirror. Very sadly, Alzheimer's took the life of both her mother and her father. They've both passed away from the disease. And one of the things that she says in her interview was she, feared that she might get the diagnosis, but she thought it might happen to her when she was around 80. And obviously, she received the diagnosis relatively young, when she was 61. There is some hope in this story, though, because she is part of a trial of a new Alzheimer's drug, which doctors and experts hope will slow the progress of the disease. But it's just such a cruel disease. Anyone who's seen a loved one go through it, because, it leaves somebody physically intact, but it removes their personality and who they are, their memories. And so to watch a loved one go through it is really, really traumatic. And I think it's very brave of her to talk about it openly after it's clearly, had such a big impact on her family.
Yes, my own father succumbed after 15 years with Alzheimer's. So, I fully understand. As she said, her mum, her dad, her grandparents and her uncle, it just keeps coming back for us. So, huge sympathy, certainly for Fiona Phillips and her family. Let's take a look now at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the unsettled conditions will continue this week with a risk of showers or longer spells of rain. Coastal East Anglia will see overnight heavy rain and strong winds clearing early on Wednesday. That will leave most places fine, but there'll be a few showers around. They'll develop more widely through the morning, some heavy. Bright spells too, breezy for most, but a touch warmer than today.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.